Alright, let's get started because I really want to get caught up on 2024 movies now that we've passed the award season and done all that stuff. Taking a small break and all that. And so I kind of wanted initially to go in like release order when we touch on all the 2024 movies that have happened up to this point. But I don't think it's going to happen that way. We're just going to jump around. So we'll get some of the stuff that came out like back in January and February, and the stuff that's coming out now, and just kind of bounce back and forth until we get caught up. So I wanted to start with these three, and the first one is The Beekeeper, which is David Ayer, who is, I guess, kind of back to form. At least as far as direction, he didn't write this one like he typically does his stuff, but it still kind of has his vibe enough, and it does kind of show that he's sort of, because he's kind of had a rough go for a little bit. It feels like kind of since Suicide Squad, he's kind of had trouble finding his footing again with like the tax collector and stuff like that in there. But this one's really solid for a movie that's just another sort of Jason Statham beating the shit out of people movie. But the thing about it is, when you look back on it, and we've talked about quite a few of those on this channel since we started it, Jason Statham does seem to be one of the more reliable people when it comes to doing movies that are just him beating the shit out of people, but they're not. There's some kind of quality to them, and he has some kind of presence that's kind of unique to him, to where he can make it feel like there's something just kind of a little different, or he brings just a different kind of charm to the one-man army beating the shit out of people movie. And that's another thing too, is we are getting a lot of these one-man army movies. As I'm doing this right now, this is the weekend that Monkey Man just came out too, and obviously, everybody's going to look to John Wick being like the sort of resurgence of this. I'd go back a couple years before John Wick to The Raid, kind of seeming like doing this whole thing, and yeah, there's a lot of these. But the thing about it is it getting played out or is it not? Like, are there more things you can do to the one man army movie to kind of keep it fresh and not just this sort of subgenre that's becoming really oversaturated? And this is a really good example of how you can do that. Because a lot of times when you look at these one-man army movies, it's usually like something set in some sort of criminal organization or something. And, like John Wick, where he has to fight off all these people that want to kill him for various reasons or crime-related reasons or whatever. In this one, they add this sort of personal touch to it, where it has this, for the kind of movie that it is, a surprisingly devastating opening, like an opening 10 minutes. This stuff with Felicia Rashad, where she's the older woman that's kind of taken him in, and she has this sort of, tranquil life out in the middle of nowhere, and she's got like a charity that she has like $2 million in, and just everything about this person seems pure. And then this devastating thing happens, and involving those scammer call centers, and that's basically what starts this whole thing off. And the interesting thing about using that as the jumping off point for the carnage that's about to happen is that, like I was saying, when you look at what these movies usually are, which is just like criminals beating up other criminals, and it's like just one of them happens to be the protagonist that we're behind, and the others are just all the bad guys coming at once. In this particular case, which feels a little different, this idea of this very real life thing that happens where you've at least heard about, but you may even know somebody personally that's been affected by this and lost everything to people like this. And when you see it all play out and you know that they're really out there, there is something more satisfying than usual about watching Jason Statham beat the shit out of these people. It's basically, I guess I could almost imagine this movie being criticized for being like a violent sort of fantasy movie for maybe a lot of people. But I don't know. It's as long as you let Jason Statham do it in a fictional movie, I don't see anything too unhealthy about that. But the idea that also the more you know about this stuff for real, the more satisfying it is. Like there's some great YouTube channels out there where they do like live streams and they record their calls with these scammers and they just sort of, prank them and draw them out and waste their time as much as they can. And when you watch those channels, you realize just how remorseless these people are when they're doing this. And so, like I said, it does almost feel like this sort of fantasy fulfillment movie in this very violent way that some people might find a tad disturbing. I don't know. Like, one thing in particular is, like, you might say, like, if you knew somebody that was personally affected by this, an older, gentle person in your life who didn't do anything to anybody loses everything because of this, your first angry thought might be, somebody should just burn that place to the ground. And what I love about that is that that's like the sort that would seem like this is what this movie's heading to is Statham's gonna beat all these people up and then burn the place to the ground. It's gonna be super satisfying. I love the choice that burn the building down is the first thing he does. Like, it's literally like the first thing that happens is he burns the building down and then the movie goes from there. The after effects of that is what the rest of the movie is. And that's when we meet, we meet several villains, but the one that's kind of at the head of this is, in a very inspired choice in both actor and antagonist, it's Josh Hutcherson as a hipster douchebag. Like, every single thing to make him the consummate hipster douchebag he has as a personality trait. It's in here somewhere. Even by the end, they just casually throw in that he's also a crypto bro, just for good measure. And that's very entertaining. And I wouldn't have expected... I feel like I maybe vaguely knew that Josh Hutcherson was in this. This was not the role I would have expected, though, and I love it. And he plays it extremely well. And the fact that he's also, like, he's got that spoiled rich kid energy. And, of course, the person that's sort of at the top of this also is, I guess he's his stepdad, who's Jeremy Irons. Because you hear Jeremy Irons is in it, and you kind of suspect that he's sort of the top villain, and he's at the top, but he's not near as villainous as the Hutcherson character at the end of the day. And obviously that goes into more directions, and there's some twists and turns involving that also, and what Hutcherson's background is. But yeah, as far as like other characters here, there is a cop character who is Felicia Rashad's daughter, so she has that personal connection to this, and it's like she gets to know Statham on kind of a personal level for like a day, but then it's like now she's hunting him, so there's kind of a dynamic with that. Honestly, the stuff involving like the law enforcement and stuff like that was kind of the least interesting stuff. It's surprisingly kind of evenly divided between us watching Statham and us watching the cops. When Statham is kind of, he's the star of the show for a reason. But I guess that keeps us from we don't get too overloaded on, fight scenes and violence and stuff like that. So it's like, it's there just periodically enough that it doesn't get old, or we don't grow sort of, immune to the charms of watching him beat the shit out of people. Especially people that we really want to see that happen to. But there's other characters they throw in here, though, that kind of bring it down a bit. Like, the cop that we're sort of following, Felicia Rashad's daughter, she has a partner who, for some reason, his whole character trait seems to be that he's just tactless. And I don't know if we're supposed to find him douchey, or if it's supposed to be funny, like it's their sort of dynamic, I don't know. But I could have done without that character. Late in the movie, they try to explain, like, oh, he hasn't slept in 2 days, and he's, like, concussed. And it's like, regardless of what's going on with him, the character has no appeal whatsoever, and there's no reason for him to be here, so, that was kind of annoying as it went on, but there's certainly going to be a cheesy factor, which, honestly, I guess is a good thing for a movie like this, because if a movie like this took itself too seriously, that could probably end up being a problem, as satisfying as it is overall. So there's a lot there's so many bee metaphors. And I know you might go into this, expecting bee metaphors, but there's probably more than you're even anticipating. Like, there's the whole, like, there's so many different points where it's clarified that he's beating the shit out of everybody. What is he? And it's dramatically, he's a beekeeper. He's only a beekeeper. Now, of course, they really get a lot of mileage out of the fact that this has double meaning because of the organization that he once worked for and their terminology and what they call their employees and all their, operations and all that use, like beekeeper and hive and stuff like that as their terminology. So it's always doubling up. There's the metaphor of, always protect the hive. Comes up, and they use every single angle of it, meaning literally with his organization and figuratively with how he's protecting innocent people and stuff like that. There's a lot. It's like, it feels like it's 50% of the dialogue is just the bee metaphors. There's a point in time where he's fighting like somebody else from the organization, and she says, "You've been a busy bee." Stuff like that. But like I said, I think it seems annoying and cheesy now, but if it wasn't there, the movie would probably be a little too serious about itself. So at the end of the day, with the big picture, it's probably better that stuff's in there, I guess. So it's fine. There is as far as it being, you don't expect the movie to be subtle by any means. But when we were talking about Hutcherson's character having, connections that have him in this, spoiled rich kid space, this bubble that he lives in. It is interesting when we go into, like I said, the twists and turns of what's going on there. It is kind of funny, though. It's like, there's the kind of unsubtle that you expect this movie to be, and then there's, like, little individual moments of unsubtlety where you think, well, that's a lot. Like, it's like, calm down a little bit. I know you're the beekeeper. I know you're the Jason Statham movie where he's the beekeeper that beats the shit out of people. Scam call center people at that. But even then, it's like, you can calm down a little bit. There's one moment in particular that makes me think that, where it's revealed who Josh Hutcherson's mom is. And it's this moment where, as soon as it's revealed who she is, there is a very dramatic music cue in the middle of dialogue. Like, the rest of the dialogue that comes after the reveal is drowned out by the dramatic music score of, this is what's going on, this is who this person is. And that's, yeah. But, this is one of those movies that I am going to come back to. I already know I'm going to see this again at some point. It's like, by then, I probably won't give a shit about any of these little criticisms or whatever, because that's just the whole movie's vibe, which is something I'm on board for, so it's whatever. And it's also interesting, though, about Josh Hutcherson and his mom, amongst, all the carnage that Jason Statham's causing, is, the whole last act of this movie I found interesting because their dynamic, just watching Josh Hutcherson and his mom's dynamic in the third act was something that was kind of surprising. Like, in a movie like this, where I was saying you expect the violence, you expect the cheesiness, but these two characters, when they reach a certain point during the climax, there was something pretty real there, and like I said, something that kind of caught me off guard, and how kind of surprising it is that each character goes in the direction that they do. So I was appreciative of that. Like, it could have gone in a pretty easy one-note direction, but they kind of played with the characters a little bit, kind of at the last minute. So that was fun. And then I do have to give the movie props also for its jarringly abrupt ending, but I kind of like that, because it's one of those movies that's exactly everything it needs to be, and then it just stops. Like, it's just like, once the movie's over, the movie is over. Like, you expect, like, oh, is there going to be some sort of epilogue, or it's like, oh, you know, where is he now? No, it is a cut to credits right then and there. And I love that. I love a really good unexpected cut to credits. You don't see that very often. Because epilogues tend to get dragged out a little too much sometimes. So I love just cutting it off immediately, like right where it needs to stop. That's fun. So yeah, this whole movie is a really good time. I had heard a lot of positive things about it over the last few months since it came out, or last couple of months since it came out, and I was kind of surprised. Like, is it because it's early in the year and it doesn't really have a lot to compete with yet? Because I think it came out like back in February around Valentine's Day, so it's like it doesn't really have a lot to compete with. So maybe that's why people are just. But no, it's a pretty solid movie overall, and a satisfying movie, which is really nice. And like I said, Jason Statham has been really good at this for a long time. Like, usually when an actor is doing this specific kind of a role for a long time, eventually it starts to wear itself out. Like Liam Neeson, for instance. Where it's just like, oh, it's another one of those, oh, I can't tell them apart. It's like, Jason Statham movies I can tell apart. Uh, so that's something. That's definitely something when it comes to movies like this. And yeah, and the action is... Sometimes the action's maybe a little too edited or a little too up close, but overall, there's still something exhilarating about it, especially when you put that, you know, emotional foundation on it of where it's coming from. And it's, you know, super over the top and super violent, but not too over the top and not too graphic. Like, just enough to where there's, you know, a few scenes where somebody will get fucked up and you'll physically react to what happens to them. But it's not. It doesn't feel like it's too much. So, and I think, you know, like I said, kind of dividing it between how much we focus on the cops and how much we focus on Statham probably helped that a lot as far as feeling like we were being bombarded with violence and fight scenes and all that. So it never really gets old as it goes on, which is great. So, yeah, that was really satisfying. So, let's go to the opposite of satisfying. Let's go to Lift, which is a Netflix movie starring Kevin Hart. If you want to talk about just feeling completely not particularly satisfied in any real way, but also not feeling any passion in any sort of way towards what it is you're looking at. So, what appears to have happened here is Kevin Hart wanted to do one of those heist movies where you get a team together, and he wanted to be at the front. He wanted to be like the Clooney of the group. And so he went to Netflix and he said, hey, I want to do a heist movie, and I want to be the star. And Netflix said, well, we're Netflix, and you're Kevin Hart. Here's $100 million to make whatever the hell. So, you're only allowed to use, like, 2 sets, but you've got all the green screens we have, which is a whole warehouse of green screens. Have at it. And I think they just fucked around for a little bit, and this movie popped out. So, they dragged in F. Gary Gray to direct it, who did have some real prestige to his name at one time. He's, you know, like, talk about this being a heist movie. He did Set It Off, and he did the Italian Job remake. There's just this, if you go back on this channel to just this past September, there's a whole video of me praising the Italian Job remake. And he's so eclectic. He did like The Negotiator. He's done everything from Friday to Law Abiding Citizen. He's got a very interesting and very unpredictable filmography. And for a while there, it was really cool and really great. Lately, it seems like he's fallen into director for hire territory. Like Fast 8 and forward, if not before that. It's just like, when you see his name on a movie now, it doesn't really mean anything. And that's kind of depressing, because he's an extremely talented director and showed that for many, many years. And now it's just sort of this bullshit. And you can kind of see him trying to add flair. Like, every now and then there'll be like when they're setting up the heist and stuff like that, you'll get scenes of, like, you know, a lot of cutting and fast camera movements and stuff like that. But you can tell it's just like, well, they hired me, I gotta do something. I gotta liven up the proceedings somehow. I'll just move the camera around a little quicker so I can get my paycheck, and maybe somewhere down the road I'll make interesting things again. So we'll see. I'm holding out. It's possible. I don't think he's completely gone yet. But yeah, it's a Netflix action movie, so it's going to be over-budgeted bullshit and a lot of green screens and basically everything you're expecting. we went through this whole thing with Red Notice. This is by no means anything even close to as reprehensible as what Red Notice was. But this movie has charm, little tiny itty bitty pieces of charm hiding in it that you really have to look for, like an Easter egg hunt, but they're in there, which Red Notice had none of. And many of these over-budgeted, over-bloated Netflix movies have none of whatsoever. And we had a whole conversation back then with Red Notice about how it's literally been mentioned in articles that that Netflix makes movies for people who barely watch movies. People who use movies as background noise. Netflix literally makes movies to cater to those people. Where there's a whole rhythm where they have, like, here's the big action scene. Here's the part where you can look at your phone. Oh, look up. Here's a big action scene. Okay, now keep the movie on. Keep the view count going or whatever it is. And work up the hours or whatever the fuck it is they count. And we'll get you to another action scene at some point. And that's what it is. And this is just another one of those movies. And it's like there's no... Like I said, everybody's walking in front of a green screen. Everybody's talking in front of a green screen. And it's even... Like, everything is a blurry background, too. And I don't mean out-of-focus backgrounds. I mean blurs behind these people as this dialogue or whatever goes on. And then we get the next, CGI-heavy action scene. There is a plot here about transferring gold from one plane to another to steal from Jean Reno. The plot is so obviously a big bag of nobody gives a fuck. And it's like, certainly the writer didn't give a fuck either. Netflix didn't give a fuck. Nobody. The actors just had to say some lines and fuck around and all that. And what sucks about that is that there is something here in the cast. Like, let's start with Kevin Hart, actually, because obviously I've bashed him quite a bit. He gets bashed in general quite a bit, despite his popularity for, just doing that same thing. The Kevin Hart thing. You know what that is. But here, it is like, when he's trying to do these sort of, master criminal sort of thing, he's not bad in this movie, but I think it's just that he's played so many bumbling idiots. He's had a career of bumbling idiots that it's one of those cases where he's not bad in the movie, but does he have enough or does he bring enough to make us forget the bumbling idiot he plays every other time, to where we can believe this master criminal with peak sexual tension with Gugu Bavarois. It's not. You can imagine it's not there. It's just not. And it's like, yeah, he may not be, all over the place screechy Kevin Hart, but he's still Kevin Hart. And I'm usually critical of when people say, oh, that actor always just plays themselves. And it's like, usually, it's like Clooney, we just brought up, gets that a lot. And it's like, I can point in so many directions of when Clooney has not done that. And it's like, it's such a lazy criticism, and people put no thought into saying it whatsoever, which is ironic given that they're criticizing an actor for supposedly being lazy. Kevin Hart is one of those people where when somebody says that, you know exactly what they mean. And it is always exactly what you get. So, like I said, I commend him for kind of trying something new, but it's not enough to break away from... You don't say, oh, this is the Kevin Hart character where he plays the master criminal with the sexual tension. You say, oh, this is Kevin Hart kind of trying to not do what he usually does. And it doesn't go beyond that. So, there's that. We've got Vincent D'Onofrio here, who's like a master of disguise character, which sounds like a better idea than it ends up being. It's mostly just putting D'Onofrio in a wig sometimes, or a fake beard and glasses sometimes, and I can imagine D'Onofrio ending up in this movie from, like, the pitch. Like, it's like, hey, it's a Kevin Hart movie for Netflix. It's Netflix, so you're probably going to get a lot of money, and you get to sort of play different characters in a way, because your character's master of disguise. It's a very easy pitch to get D'Onofrio into this movie, because D'Onofrio loves to act, and it's like, oh, to get to play kind of different characters or personalities in one, get a lot of money for it, okay, that's easy. but he's just not... Even in something like this, I feel like if D'Onofrio was really given the chance to, like, show off, he would jump on it immediately. But the movie doesn't give him anything. For most of the movie, he's sitting on his seat in the plane. So, that's about it. Um, Billy Magnuson is in this, who I do love. He's somebody that I don't think gets kind of the credit he deserves. And it's to the point, it feels almost so perfect that the part has to have been written for him because the character's name is Magnus. So, and he's got this way of playing these characters that have, like, they're usually comedic characters and they have really big personalities. And they're characters that probably nearly any other actor in, like, his group would make really annoying, and they'd be the character that you just want to shut the fuck up and go away. But Magnuson always finds a way. I can't remember any example of a time I didn't like Billy Magnuson in a movie. So he's found a way to perfect that sort of side comedic character with the big personality and make it work and make you want to see more of him. Make you wish the movie was more focused on that character. It's something he's really good at. So it was nice to see him get to do more of that here. Burn Gorman is here as one of the villains. I always love seeing him. Doesn't get a lot to do, but he's just got this sort of presence that follows him around in any role, and it's like I'm always drawn to him, so it was kind of nice to see him here, and he brought a little bit of personality to the otherwise very bland atmosphere of what's going on here. So it's a really strong cast for such a bland-ass movie as this. But it's, like, just from the get-go, though, it's one of those movies that you feel like you know exactly what it is from the start, and it's not going to really improve or surprise you in any way. Where it starts off, and it's like the whole Netflix vibe in general, where everything looks digital and fake. And it's like, and it's the kind of movie that falls, like, just sort of between Netflix and Fast and Furious, and these opening scenes where we get, like, random shots of these, European places or whatever. There's this really sort of uneventful, this mundane boat chase. There's, like, one sort of, like, drone shot through a ferry that's kind of cool, but it's, like, for a fraction of a second, and then it just kind of does this thing. It also feels like it's trying to do a bit of a Mission Impossible thing. There's a lot of whooshing camera movements. Just everything. It's the old dangling the keys in front of a baby thing, is what Netflix seems to have perfected. And somehow continues to make these movies that, actually it's not even a mystery. We know how. We just talked about it with the making movies for people that barely are watching a movie when they put it on, so it's just depressing. And as if the movie didn't already have a sort of dated feel, the opening sequence is them heisting an NFT. There's a point in time at the end where Kevin Hart says something like, now I know NFTs are like a fading sort of fad. It's like, yeah. And you used it as a major plot point in your movie. In that moment, he's trying to convince us that maybe it's not, this fading thing, but, it's fucking... I literally just talked about Josh Hutcherson in The Beekeeper and how it's literally a punchline to his character that he's a crypto bro. But, yeah, and they do the whole thing where the opening sequence is also the artist for this NFT is this masked sort of Banksy-type guy. And they kidnap him, and they bring him back to their place, and there's a very, very dramatic unmasking of this artist. And it's like, oh man, who's this going to be? Is it going to be some big cameo? What's it going to be? It's Ned from the recent Spider-Man movies. I like him, but he's not particularly dramatic reveal material. At least not yet. So... I don't know. There's nothing to this movie. I said it's not. There's another character too I forgot about, and there's a reason I forgot about him. And this kind of just says everything about the movie, I think. It's a character in their crew, and he's gonna be like the outside. He's gonna kind of be like Seth Green in The Italian Job. He's like the computer guy that's kind of sitting on the outside, making things happen. And the way they introduce his character before we see him is, I think it's Gugu says, like, oh, he's a piece of shit. Somebody in the crew says he's a piece of shit. And then we meet him, and it's like, that's the build-up is, oh, this guy's a real piece of shit, but man, he knows what to do. He does his job well, even though he's a piece of shit. We get one scene of him being a piece of shit to the guy giving him his coffee, and then he just never has that character trait again. He just does his job. Like, it doesn't throw a wrench into anything. It doesn't kind of show how he does his job. He just does his job. So that's... Sam Worthington's here also as, like, Gugu's superior or something like that. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Nothing in this movie, as far as what they're talking about and what's happening, matters. All that matters is that things happen. There's planes. There's fights. There's things that are clever reveals and all that. So, but like I said, for what it is, for being a bland Netflix movie, a bland Kevin Hart Netflix movie to be more specific, there's something that's mildly entertaining hiding in here somewhere, really deep in the depths of it. So it wasn't like a miserable experience or anything. And it's pretty, straightforward of what it is. Like, it's not, they don't really throw too much into it. It's not like over long necessarily. So it's got that, I suppose. It's nobody's gonna like it. I think it came out back in January. So you're probably watching this, and you watched this when it came out, and you have no memory of it as of right now. It's like, wait, I might have seen this. That's one of those... It's one of those movies where, like, a year from down the road, you might be looking at, Kevin Hart's Wikipedia page or something, and you'll see Lift there, and it'll be like, I think I might have seen that. When that happens, when you actually don't remember if you've seen a movie or not, it'll be one of those. So, $100 million it takes to do that. That's that Netflix spending for you. So, let's go on to the last movie, which is Miller's Girl. I didn't really know what it was. I just knew that Martin Freeman and Jenna Ortega were in it. And that's basically all I knew, and then I just went into it. So, as I was watching it and getting sort of deep into it, I was noticing that it's from a first-time director, Jade Halley Bartlett, if I wrote this down correctly. And the kind of unfortunate thing about that is I was watching the movie and it's like, so this movie's kind of a piece of shit. Like, it's just extremely mediocre, especially in its writing. And we'll talk about the reasons why. But the direction is kind of solid. Like, it's pretty well directed. Like, for this being a first-time director, I can imagine this director, like, there's the potential for them to do something, like, really good and really sort of stylish in a cool way and really establish themselves as a name. Just a shame about that mediocre writing. Just the shitty script this thing has. And so it was unfortunate when the end credits came up and I realized that the writer and director are the same person. That really solid director is also the mediocre writer of this movie. So I said shitty is kind of a strong word to describe the script, but it's not good. So let's talk about that. The first thing I want to talk about is Jenna Ortega's presence in this. Might as well, since she's probably the main drawing factor of this movie's existence. And it opens with her being emo and narrating and walking through fog, shit like that, wearing a schoolgirl outfit and all that. And it's like, oh, it's Ortega's doing this thing again. Okay. And the really annoying thing about that is that Jenna Ortega is way too talented to be in such a box this early. And it's like, I get it. I get that she's really good at that thing, but she's also she's shown that she's a really good actress, and there's a lot more she can do than just this one thing. So it's one of those things where it's like, I could almost see the whole, like I was talking about, the whole movie's existence being banked on, oh, if we just get Jenna Ortega in it, her fan base will show up, and maybe some money will be made on this movie that otherwise would make none. I don't really know what its success was. I don't think it was in any theaters around here. But I'd imagine any attention it got was based on her here, and maybe her doing the emo schoolgirl outfit walking through fog thing. So there's that. Also, everybody's speaking in really over-the-top accents, which has to be something because, like I've said before, accents are one of those things that people tend to get really fixated on that I just don't really tend to notice because I wouldn't really be able to differentiate, what accent is what or whether it's good or bad or whatever. But this was like distractingly over the top the way these characters were talking. So, like almost cartoonish in this movie that's trying to be super serious. Um, and you can tell it's one of those ones where the dialogue is supposed to feel super snappy. Like, it's really clever and the characters are speaking really quickly back and forth, but it's one of those cases where it's like, any dialogue can appear snappy if it's being said quickly by characters that are talking to each other. But when you actually, like, listen to the words, there's really not much of any substance going on. They're just kind of talking fast at each other, and it's giving you the illusion that it's snappy, but it's really not. Particularly with the younger cast, also, it just everything feels unnatural. These people feel like aliens. They're like reading, rejected blacklist scripts or something. And well, this was a blacklist script, to my understanding, just not a rejected one. So there's that. And there's a lot of like really sort of cringy characters that I feel like are supposed to be the really sort of colorful side characters, like Ortega's friend Winnie or Martin Freeman's wife. And these characters are kind of hard to watch, and not in the way the movie wants you to feel that way. And I can't blame the actresses. It's the writing and the way the characters are developed, that it's like they're supposed to be what they are. You'd have to see it, but going into that, though, especially with this character Winnie, and then eventually Ortega's character, and what basically the whole vibe of the movie is supposed to be. It's apparently supposed to be an erotic thriller. It's supposed to be... you can really get, like... Maybe she was going for, like, Adrian Lyne vibes, is what I was getting here. One Adrian Lyne movie in particular probably really comes to mind, but just kind of a general Adrian Lyne vibe was kind of what was coming to mind. Especially with, like, the Unfaithful vibe going on. Not just literally the movie Unfaithful, but he also did, like, Fatal Attraction and stuff like that. He had to have been a huge inspiration for this movie. I cannot really see this any other way. But God Almighty, this is far from the sleazy quality that Adrian Lyne sort of perfected and made great and popular. It's trying to simultaneously be poetic and perverse. It's trying to be provocative and shocking. I think especially through the casting of Jenna Ortega, even though Jenna Ortega's already done X by this point, so it's not it's not like this whole shock factor of, oh, Jenna Ortega's doing this. No, we've seen her in even more of an explicit setting than this. It almost feels like this is actually like... It's almost like when you think about how, like, through the dialogue that this movie has and how that's supposed to be provocative and shocking and all that, it's like I can kind of imagine this being... Because Jenna Ortega, as extremely talented as she is, tends to have... Her main fan base is obviously quite younger. So it's like I can kind of imagine this movie being, like, a lot of her fan base's first dirty movie, I guess you could say. Like, they'll see it just because she's in it, and it'll be like, oh, I wasn't expecting this. Because these would be the same people that might be too young and too afraid to see something like X for now, but yeah, that's the vibe I get. It's like, it's going to be some group of young people's first dirty movie, essentially, and it's like, oh, they're saying a lot of dirty things, many of which are going over their heads, and that's... Yeah, and it seems really satisfied with itself, honestly, with that. And that's... Eventually, it gets to a point to where it doesn't seem like... It's hard to tell if it wants to be sexy or disturbing or a combination of both, but when it's all said and done, it's just really skeevy and repulsive, and once again, not in the way I think it's trying for. So it's like, I think another reason it feels like a sort of young person's dirty movie, if you want to call it that, is there's one moment where Jenna Ortega proposes to her friend Winnie that they make out and take a picture of it and send it to a teacher. And when they're about to kiss, there is so much dramatic build-up. Like, the dialogue in this movie is about as dirty as it can get, or as dirty as it's trying to. Almost like a 13-year-old writing in a diary versions of dirty. Like, not particularly mature, but like it's trying for the mature raunchiness, but the mature doesn't come through. So the idea of them making out, there's so much build up. The score is getting so loud. It's taking its time. It's like, we're gonna make out now. Here it comes. We're gonna make out. We're gonna make out. And they're really building it up like it's gonna be this holy shit mind-blowing thing. And it's like, is something else going to happen? Is there gonna be a left turn here? Is she gonna do, instead of kissing Winnie, is she gonna do something really insane? No, they just kiss. That's what all the build-up was about, was two girls kissing. You know, something completely provocative in 2024. I don't know. It all feels very childish, while, like I said, thinking it's being like poetic in its perversity. But it's just not coming together. It's just not working. But to talk about that solid direction I was talking about, there are some inspired shots here. There's there's a moment when there's like a side angle of everybody sitting on a bench, and then, you know, like the teacher or her friend or whoever is there leaves, and it's just Ortega and Freeman, whose mounting sexual tension is the whole purpose of this movie. So when it's just them on the bench alone, instead of there being like a cut, like you normally get, the camera like comes around to where it's like a front shot of them sitting on the bench together. That was kind of an inspired move. There's this kind of cool shot where we get like a close up of Martin Freeman's face, and we see like the figure of her in his eye. Like, that's kind of cool. There's a lot of like dreamlike elements, particularly when he's like reading her story and he's kind of seeing it in his mind. There's an interesting thing that happens here, and I don't even know if the movie intended to do it, which was, there's a scene that we witness, and for a lot of the rest of the movie, I was questioning if that scene actually happened or not. Because when he's like reading the story and it takes on that sort of dreamlike imagery, it kind of felt like it was in line with that, so it was kind of like blurring this sort of reality with what's in the story. That's something that's kind of interesting. Like I said, I don't know if it's supposed to be ambiguous if that scene actually happened or not. Because I would say, I guess it was, because the movie never really confirms for sure. Like, it seems to, you know, really be pointing in a direction, but it does try to be sort of, there's some level of ambiguity in the end a little bit. So, yeah, there's something here. And there's also this great moment when, the power dynamic between Freeman and Ortega is changing, and so the camera angle changes accordingly to kind of show who's the powerful one in this situation visually. So, I mean, it's not without merit, this movie. And like I said, especially her direction. And yeah, all that stuff I mentioned might sound like it's pretty on the nose, and I guess you could say it is, but for a first time out, there's definitely a lot of promise in the directing aspect. So, there's that. The writing, however, yeah, I mean, like I said, I can imagine, you know, because it's so wordy and descriptive, and, you know, has that sort of Adrian Lyne vibe that's sort of this thing we don't really see much anymore. That's kind of, it feels like this sort of throwback. I can see why this got picked up, but I don't know, it's mostly just kind of repulsive, and like I said, not in the way I think was intended, so That's unfortunate, but there's talent in there, so there's that. So that's how we're going to start these 2024 reviews, and like I said, we're going to jump around between, the beginning of the year and where we are now, and hopefully get caught up on all these movies, and then and hopefully we'll get into stuff as it's coming out, and we'll be back to normal. So I do think the next thing I'm going to go ahead and do, which would probably be the easiest thing to do, is I'm just going to talk about Dune 2 by itself. Because obviously I'm quite passionate about that. So then we'll continue on and do the normal stuff. So until the next thing, I think that's it.